Okay, so here's what I wanted to do in my earlier spaces. I'm going to play this video and I'm going to explain it and connect it back to Ripple and what we know about XRP. Okay, so this debate happened in 1983, and this was when the first gold commission was put together for the defenders of the Federal Reserve to also then have to debate the people that were advocating for a gold standard. And Ron Paul was part of this commission. It was the first time it was had, first time they even formed an official body formed and even discussed this. 2 years later, that's when the first patents for the blockchain technology were filed by the NSA. Okay, so remember when he's talking about gold, you have to understand that the tokenization is about ready to occur for gold. And what have all these central banks been doing? They've been buying gold like bananas. They've been buying it all up in the tons and the tons and the tons, more than they ever have. And so the whole idea of using Bitcoin as the store of value that it is, even though it's old, outdated tech that's too expensive, it's too slow. Most of the hash power is located offshore, and we got this Michael Saylor goblin that's really trying to push this shit and make us sell our U.S. Treasury gold for his code. Fuck that. All right. So all of this stuff that's going on with, the collapse of the fiat monetary system, it all loops back to this whole debate that happened in 1983. So I'm going to let Paul talk for a little bit, and I'm going to stop him and loop it back to Ripple and what we know about RLUSD, XRP, and XRPL.
Subject today is whether or not we should have a gold standard or whether we should follow the standard that we are using today, and that is the discretionary paper standard. And obviously, I support the idea that it would be wiser to have a gold standard rather than a paper standard. And I think that, unfortunately, for those who believe in the paper standard, have one little problem. They have to defend what we have today, and they have to defend the soundness of the economy.
All the things he's saying that were going on in 1983, remember, they're coming off the Carter inflation, okay? And Paul Volcker was in charge of the Fed at the time. And what did he have to do? He had to raise interest rates. He had to jack them all the way up in order to reel back a lot of the money that they were printing out all throughout the 60s, up through the 70s with Vietnam, the Great Society program, Medicare, Medicaid, all these foreign commitments that were going around. And that's because Nixon had to cut the link to gold in 1971 in order to facilitate more of that money printing to keep the scam going. Okay, so keep thinking about the tokenization of gold that's coming, and everything he's saying is applying directly to today because we have all of this inflation going on, and now Trump is saying he's going to lower the interest rates, which is going to flood out all this money into the general economy. And what happens when that happens? While people are abandoning the dollar for international trade, all this spells out is that they're going to hyperinflate away the fucking currency. And this is exactly the debate that was going on in 1983 that everyone needs to pay attention to.
Economy, the soundness of the dollars, and they have to explain why the interest rates are high and why the housing market's not doing so well. So I think they have a terrible job. And I'm in a much better position to say, well, we have another system, and the terrible thing that happened when we even had a little taste of a gold standard, we had that terrible situation where you had interest rates between 3 and 5%. So I would suggest that there are many, many advantages for the gold standard, and the specific things that are advantageous to us with the gold standard I'm not going to talk about in my opening remarks. I'm not going to explain why that you have low interest rates with the gold standard. I'm not going to explain to you why, if you had a free market and a gold standard, you would have full employment, except for a few who just physically were incapable of working. I happen to believe, and will not explain now, why a gold standard would secure an economy that would have sustained economic growth, and we would never have to worry whether it's 4% economic growth or 10. If the economy decided to grow with a healthy currency and a healthy economy at a rapid rate, we would never be concerned about cutting off the gold supply in order to thwart a business recovery. And also, I don't think I will mention anything in my opening remarks about why a gold standard would enhance free trade around the world, which is one of the most significant problems that we're facing today, because we have paper currency fluctuating not on a monthly basis or a yearly basis, but on an hourly basis and sometimes on a minute basis.
On a second basis. The fluctuations of currency have been happening, especially with the amount of money that they've been flooding out into there. That is what we see with these forex exchange rates, and why having XRP as the money processor to stabilize that is so important, and all within 3 to 5 seconds instead of 3 to 5 days, like it was for Swift under that in that era, and what it is now, and what is being abandoned by the BRICS nations because they've had it.
And it is positively impossible for anybody to set up long-term trade agreements. And for this reason, we are seeing some serious problems. So I would not even suggest to mention that it has anything to do with the unsoundness of our currencies that has delivered to us in Texas on the Mexican border a disastrous problem. Mainly because one country destroyed their money slightly faster than another country, and now on both sides the unemployment rate is 50%. And I would not want to mention at the beginning also whether or not a gold standard would have anything to do with savings, with the belief that the purchasing power of the dollar would be maintained over a period of time, because it just happens that it would have a lot to do with savings, especially if you combine that with eliminating all taxes on interest earned on savings.
As well as the income tax. So this is all about returning wealth to the American people. And what did he just say there about all of the free trade agreements that are put in place? You know, and one currency getting destroyed faster than another one, and then they just both just destroys their entire nation. That was all happening under the CIA coups. Okay, they would go in there, destroy those nations, make them take the dollar in order to keep the scam going. Okay, are you starting to put this together now? This is how this thing was kept alive.
But what I would like to mention are 4 points about the gold standard in very general terms. Why I have come to accept the idea that a gold standard is the only.
And remember, too, when he says gold standard, it's not. The thinking has evolved since this time. It no longer is because of the technological innovation. So I'm trying to add to his argument here. Given the technological breakthroughs that we have, we can now tokenize. We will be able to tokenize gold. So it cannot just be just gold. It can also be silver. It can be land. It can be assets. It can be a whole basket of things. Okay, it's not. It's not that it's just should be gold. You know, and Ludwig von Mises talks about this. You know, Hayek handle it like it can be a basket of things as long as it's tangible and linked to the physical world. Okay, and I believe even his thinking has changed on this since 1983. And in fact, I've even listened to him talk about it here recently. But the technology has changed, and we can have blockchains, have these tokenized assets, you know, whether it's minerals or whatever else, even stuff that's probably even in the ground, and we can use this then as part of our value asset value, our valuation as an asset class for the entire United States or any country really, and that could be used as a backing towards their own currency.
Standard that can be used if you want a free market and you want a sound, healthy economy. First off, it's the issue of central planning. So often there are many conservatives who believe that central planning in farming and agriculture and producing steel and doing anything in the economy outside of money is a disaster. They say, well, look at the results of central planning in Russia. Look at the central planning in any socialist nation, and they reject it outright, and I believe correctly. But in the same sense, they reject central planning in every other area, but wholeheartedly endorse the same concept with central planning in money.
Because they're all bought off. They're all blackmailed. Okay, I mean this is one of the heights of the Cold War. I mean this is 1983. So they had the ideology back then of fighting communism using containment theory. But here's the deal, and domino theory. After the wall came down, they kept it up. They kept expanding NATO. All right, that we became policemen of the world. It corrupted itself, and this is the power over money. This is why the central planning of money never works, because you have the dark hearts of humanity that are invested in it. And when you have something like RLUSD, which has to post audits, has to maintain its backing with whatever asset that we got, that Ripple can put together to it, and it's a decentralized reserve for people to transact without leverage. This solves this problem. You get where you starting to put it together?
And I have come to the conclusion that central planning of money is just as disastrous as central planning and farming. And therefore, just the general idea, the notion that man is capable of planning the economy by controlling the money. But the one thing is different about planning centrally the money supply as compared to planning farming. Farming only feeds us, but the money sustains every single transaction. It is a participant in everything that we do. It is the unit of account that we have to measure every transaction. All our services and all our goods are measures in terms of the unit of account. And if we believe that
Your measuring stick. When he says unit of account, think ruler. Okay? It's what we measure things by. And we call that the Federal Reserve note today. And in order for it to maintain there is no parity to any of it. It's just full faith and credit of the United States, and that has been severely diminished. And because of Russia getting kicked out of SWIFT, the payments the rest of the world realizes we cannot be trusted to have the reserve currency, and they're tired of using SWIFT as a means of transaction because of the sanctions that could be put on them. So this is about these nations getting their own self-determination back. All right, and in order to do that, you have to collapse the Federal Reserve System.
we can plan centrally and determine that unit account without the market participating, I think we get what we have now.
Without the market participating, this is RLUSD is a market-derived solution, backed by a company, has audits, has compliance. Okay, this is coming from the marketplace now. It's not just a bunch of banks that got together and launched something from Jekyll Island.
Very chaotic conditions, which are bound to get more chaotic after a period of time. So I don't believe that central planning in money can be successful. I happen to believe and accept the ideas of the Austrian School of Economics, as Mises in particular explained, that the business cycle is precisely caused by central planning of money, and that the booms and busts are inevitable. That as we
Drive meaning lower interest rates because you're putting out more money into the economy, which is what Trump is saying he wants the Fed to do, and there's only one reason why you would do that when inflation is at its highest clip we've seen since this time, or even before this time, and all the other nations are abandoning the dollar in international trade. That's to collapse it.
The economy this year and for next year's election, you will see conditions improve, but sure enough, you will see the consequence of the inflation that we have today. In a couple years, you will see the recession, if not the depression of 86 or 87. So it is for
which happened.
This reason, out of a humanitarian concern for our people, that we must reject the notion of central planning in money, just as we reject the central ideas of central planning in agriculture or steel manufacturing. So central planning of money, I reject outright. The second major reason why I reject the notion of paper money is the issue of power. I believe we must address this because even though those who wield the power and the control of the money, I sincerely believe they're well motivated to do what is good and right for the people. Just as the liberal interventionist is assuming he's doing good by building houses for the poor people. But they never take into account that they tear down more houses than they build up, and that so much of the HUD money goes to building country club communities. So I would say the same thing happens because the power is abused and misdirected. But it's an ominous power. There is no other power greater than the power over money, the power to create and contract the money supply, the power to control the purchasing power of your money. Throughout history, this has proven to be the most sought after monopolistic power of man. And it has become more sophisticated over the decades and over the centuries, more sophisticated now and more international in scope than ever before. So I see the issue of power and the control over money as being something that we cannot ignore, we must address.
Think of how it is today. Okay? Think about it. It is so pervasive. It's so immediate. And now we have AI on top of it.
I believe closely associated with this is the issue of morality as well. By what moral right do we have to create purchasing power out of thin air? Whether it's done by the creation of credit or Federal Reserve notes, or whether it's the creation of SDRs in an international scope, by what right do they do this? Is it any more moral to dilute the value of your purchasing power of the money you hold in your wallet than it is for the farmer to dilute the milk supply with water? I would say there's an issue of morality here just as strong as the issue of power. I also happen to believe also, because it's a moral issue more than an economic issue, it is for this reason that the people have lost trust in their government, trust in the banks, trust in business, trust in themselves, and that we are a nation of distrust.
How prophetic. Look at where we are right now. It is precisely because of the Federal Reserve. It is why it needs to get taken down. $37 trillion worth of debt. Back then it was barely a trillion, maybe two. We're at 37 now. You don't pay it off.
And it's for this reason I believe that until we restore trust in government, trust in the system, and trust in the money, there will be no resolution of this problem. It is the issue of trust in people and trust in money that must come before you.
See, now here's here's the deal. Right then and there, what has Ripple been doing? They've been building trust in the system with the stakeholders. They've been learning their problems. They've been trying to figure out the spreadsheet issues. What are the problems that we can solve with these cross-border payments? All right, in order to decentralize the reserve and get rid of this power for all coming time. This is an epoch change in geopolitics and international finance. Everything. It's an epoch change. It's something that man has sought after, because every single time a nation gets the reserve currency, they get big, they get corrupt, and they collapse every single time. And that's where we're at right now. And we can either do a voluntary one where we have a new system all ready to go and get right into it and get everybody an exchange rate to get into it, and it's all digital and it can all happen on your fucking phones, or we just let it go and it just pops and we all just fucking suffer. So which companies out there created a unit of account, a method of exchange, and a payment method? That's it. Ripple built that. It's just the gumball machine, okay, to solve this entire problem. And what is the backing towards RLUSD? Well, we're gonna find out with the audits, and especially with the tokenization coming online. So let's go a little bit further here.
Solution of this problem. It is the issue of trust in people and trust in money that must come before you can start talking about nickeling and diming it, trying to get back to a balanced budget, because that certainly hasn't worked.
And it hasn't worked since.
So I think it's important to address the issue of central planning, the issue of power, and third, I think that we must address in general terms the issue of the origin of money. I know that's been talked about, and we recognize, those of us who believe in commodity money clearly understand.
Commodity money. Commodity money. Not just gold. So they didn't have the technology back then. Now we do, to tokenize things, to back our currency, to restore trust into the system, because there is none now. It's gone.
That money, paper money, and credit creation didn't come out of the marketplace. That came out of the heads and the fantasies of the intellectuals and the government officials of those who want paper to be money, but never out of the marketplace. So I would say the paper standard is bucking history, and it's bucking economic law and economic truth, and they only can do it with force and more power to make people accept it, because
IRS, SWIFT, CIA, military interventions, NSA, Five Eyes, blackmail, genocide, rape, refugees. These are all the tactics to keep it in force. This is the thing that we're fighting.
Economically and historically, paper is not money. It can't be money. It's only money because we're forced to use it and because there's a residual trust in the pieces of paper that we carried around, because at one time it did have real value.
Prior to 1971, it was linked to $35 an ounce. That's what he's talking about. At one time, it did have real value. You could change it in. Kennedy was assassinated because he wanted to go back to silver certificates, and he wanted to take out the CIA. Martin Luther King was assassinated because he turned against the Vietnam War. So did Robert F. Kennedy. And why were we in Vietnam? It's all about minerals, resources, trade lanes. That's in getting people to use the dollar. Okay, and they usually fight against communism. And of course they were trying to spread their shit too. They had their own form of their cabal, and we bankrupted them. But our shit never cleared out. We were supposed to cut spending after the wall fell. We never did it. We just took over the world and enforced SWIFT down their necks. And if they said anything, did anything, we take them out. Gaddafi's entered the chat. Saddam's entered the chat. Noriega's entered the chat. The list is endless ever since the wall came down of how much shit has been happening in order to fight whatever imagined foe that we got out there.
Just think for a moment.
And it is always used as cover just to keep the dollar going throughout the world.
All of us were stranded on a small island, and we had absolutely nothing else, no trade, but we were all put on the island, and we were expected to survive. We would have to do what to create capital to survive? We would have to get our food and build our houses and make our tools. And everything that we had in excess of what we consumed could be our capital, and we could trade it. But how many of you would accept the idea that if we were all working busily and making trades and somebody gives a bushel of wheat for a bushel of corn, how many of you would accept the notion if we had the one individual to arrive on the beach and he said, I'll solve all your problems, I'm going to create wealth for you. I have this little thing called a printing press, and I'm going to print up Federal Reserve notes, and you'll all be wealthy. How many would trust the individual? He would probably be thrown off the island for coming up with a scandalous idea. It wouldn't work. You have to have something that people seek after and they hold as something important and something that they will hold as money. History shows that people have chosen gold first and probably silver second. But most people, when they're driven into the economy, they'd rather have cigarettes than pieces of paper.
Good old Ron.
So we have three major issues: central planning, the issue of power, and the issue of the origin of money, where I do not believe on the long run, if you live in a free society, you can buck the tide, the trend, the issues of economic law, and the issue of common sense. Now, fourth, and this is a major issue with me as well, one of the fundamental reasons why I believe we must have restraint on the creation of credit. And that is, if you truly believe in freedom, if you truly believe in a free society, if you do, that means you believe that government should be limited to the protection of your liberty, not to the transfer of wealth. The paper money system is there to enhance those who believe in the transfer of wealth. You can transfer just so much wealth with taxation and the people rebel. But we're at the point now where you can't tax them anymore. We transferred over $220 billion worth of wealth last year that we couldn't even tax the people for. Can you imagine if we'd have proposed at the beginning of last year that we were going to raise taxes by $220 billion? Never. It wouldn't have been acceptable.
But they printed up $220 billion worth of wealth. And what do you think they've been doing for the last 90 days? Every 90 days now, it's $1 trillion. Not 220 billion, $1 trillion every fucking 90 days. Every 90 days, it's $1 trillion now. What the fuck do you think is about ready to happen? And they're just going to say they're going to lower interest rates? When they're supposed to be reeling in this money and destroying it to get it out of the circulation? They're collapsing this.
We did run up the deficit. So we delivered this to the Fed, and the Fed accommodates us. The Fed accommodates the politician, and the
Every single time. They've been doing it ever since. Every single crisis, all they've done is keep inflating the bubble, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Ever since 1971. And this is 1983 when he's talking. Understand the times you're living in.
Politician gets reelected. So what does he do? Not only does he destroy the economy by manipulating the whole business cycle by the creation of new money, what he does is we lose twice, because he takes the money and he spends it on programs that don't work. Instead of doing the things they were supposed to do, the programs do exactly the opposite. You don't get more houses by the government building houses, you get less. And I
Graft, corruption. We see all this shit playing out.
also have come to the conclusion that in the last few years that you don't even get more defense when you spend more money in the military budget.
Military-industrial complex, corruption, bribery, the adventurism abroad. Everything is connected.
You get less.
It always comes back to the lender of last resort, well, actually the lender of first resort, the Federal Reserve System. We have to get out from underneath it.
Defense for that. So I would say that so often when you can get the money so cheaply by just sending a little Federal Reserve or sending over a Treasury bill and get whatever you need, that I would say this enhances and it gives the ability of the politician and government to be all powerful. And that to me is our great threat, because the programs are a threat to our freedom. The money, as it's being destroyed and as it's being inflated, and causes the crises that we see around the world. And the best example, of course, is at our border in the South. Those crises threaten the political freedoms. I believe that if we could have a free society and sound money and gave up all our material assets, I believe that if we had our freedoms, we could survive without any difficulty whatsoever. But the problem today is what we're doing is we're destroying the money and at the same time destroying our freedoms. It was not by accident that the currency had to change over a period of time. The government size grew. So from 1913 to 1971, systematically they eroded and destroyed the commodity standard.
Creation of the Federal Reserve till Nixon cutting the convertibility of gold underneath the Bretton Woods Agreement that was agreed upon during the end of the 1944 as we're winning the war, where all the countries in the world linked their currencies to gold, which is then linked their currencies to the dollar, which is then linked to gold at $35 an ounce. And then Nixon cut that because all these nations started to feel like, hey, wait a minute, you guys are breaking the agreement. You're spending way too much money than we think you have gold backing it up, so we want our gold back. Nixon said, nah, fuck you, we're going to keep it all. And we're gonna just run trade deficits with you for the rest of the world. And if you say anything about it, well, you get the CIA right up your ass, or some military intervention, whatever else. It's Scam City, man.
As weak as it was, there was still some residual relationship of the paper to a gold standard up until 71. But since then, there has been nothing. And it's for this reason you see the escalation of spending, government programs, and no restraint whatsoever. So it is.
No matter what Doge does, as long as we have the central bank, we live under the floodplain of it. We have to get rid of the central bank, and this is the only way it can happen. By Trump dropping the fucking interest rates while everyone's abandoning the dollar, hyperinflates it away. And, oh, looky here, we got a brand new financial system. Hey, Ripple, you have this quick-to-market solution here. Fantastic. Go for it. That's how simple this shit's gonna be, man.
Is this participation between the politicians and the central bank, which not only threatens our economic security, which is secondary to the threat to our individual freedom. That's the 4 reasons, in general, I believe we ought to have a gold standard.
Tokenized now. Okay? It's not just gold, it's silver, it's everything else. This would be acceptable under the Austrian School of Economics. And I think if Ron would see this, he'd agree that as long as we can have a decentralized reserve with stable coins that are backed up by real assets, tokenized, whatever else. This checks out. This is how we can solve the problem of reserve currency. So yeah,
is fantastic, and many of my friends are in the audience, and
get out of here.
I will be taking.
That's what it is. All right. Everyone needs to watch the rest of that debate. Listen to Governor Pardee. I mean, he's tough to listen to, but yeah, I made it through it. He says a lot of uhs and ums. It's very annoying. But look at where we're at today. What's going on? SAB 121 got repealed, got rescinded. Now all the banks who this technology was designed for can now start to really analyze all of these crypto assets in the proper light. What can they be used for? Are they compliant? Do they have a company backing them to upgrade the software or infrastructure or anything around it? Who are they partnered with? What are their relationships? Okay, these are the proper questions that everyone should have been asking a fucking blockchain the whole time. So it's not going to be Bitcoin. All right, even I was listening today to someone else say on the news, they're like, well, Bitcoin's more on the investment side, not the transactional side. They're fucking telling us. They're fucking telling us. And Trump just told the WEF to kiss his ass. And he's telling the Fed to lower the interest rates. This bomb's about ready to go off. And we got Michael Saylor pushing around Bitcoin. He didn't get the Trump pick. Brad and Stu did. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence at all. And MicroStrategy is trading off the volatility of Bitcoin, which, you know, we all know the flaws of Bitcoin. Now it's slow, expensive, you know, the hash power is mostly offshore and all that other stuff. We don't know who the mystery bag of Satoshi is. And now with the cartels being designated as terrorist organizations, guess what? All these fucking meme coin bros and whatever else that working for either them or some intelligence agency, you're all going to be caught up in it too, because they're seizing a lot of this shit and they're going to just start selling it because it can't be used for anything. It's not a yield generating asset like XRP is. And how we can back it by gold from RLUSD. And all Trump has to do during the crisis is say, oh, you're legal tender now. Ripple, you're the new Swift, you're the new Fed, go for it. That's it. That's it, man. And it's obvious what's playing out now. It's scarily obvious. So I'm gonna stop this here. Let me know if you like it. Maybe I'll do another.